Hello, it's Macintoshes 2025, the month where we celebrate all things classic Macintosh. And for that, I wanted to show off what I've been working on for the last several months. I'm making a new classic Mac game, and for it, I've created a custom development environment that runs in modern macOS. More on that later. And a 2D game engine I'm calling Monochromatic. It targets two seemingly different platforms that have a sort of interesting kinship. The first is black and white 68030 Macintoshes like everyone's favorite SE30 or the Classic 2. The second is the Playdate handheld game console by Panic. It turns out that these two platforms have more in common than one might think. For one, Panic is a Mac developer going all the way back to the classic Mac days, so there's already a Mac connection there. But the most obvious similarity is that they both have black and white 1-bit displays, so everything on them is going to be in glorious monochrome. But on top of that, they are both entirely CPU-based systems. Apple famously, or perhaps infamously, depending on who you ask, opted not to include any dedicated graphics or audio hardware in the original Macintoshes, meaning everything had to be done on the CPU. And everything the Playdate does is on the CPU as well. And they both have C programming interfaces, so it turns out it's not so crazy to make a game that can run on both platforms. Now granted, a Mac SE30 from 1989 with its 16 MHz 68030 processor is much slower than a Playdate made in 2022 with a modern 168 MHz CPU. So the difference in capability is more akin to comparing an SE30 and one of the second or third generation Power Macs. The Playdate also did at least one major thing right for game development that Apple just couldn't manage to do. They completely take care of off-screen rendering for you with no need to manually copy any pixels to the screen every frame. One of the biggest challenges in classic Mac game development is that you had to spend a ton of CPU cycles copying all of your graphics data to the screen to avoid flickering. And on a 68K Mac, that's where most of your CPU cycles are going. So that means the benchmark platform is the 68K Mac. If I can get things running at a good speed there, then porting it to the Playdate should be no problem. And that's what I've got. Right now, Monochromatic supports an arbitrarily large scrolling tile map with pixel by pixel scrolling both vertically and horizontally. And let me tell you, getting horizontal scrolling looking this smooth took a lot of work. It can have several moving sprites rendering on top of the tile layer, and of course audio, including sound effects and dynamic music, all going at 30 frames per second on real hardware. Now I'd like to show off what I've got of the game so far. These are still very early days, so there's not that many mechanics done yet, and I'm doing it in Mini VMAC because it's not so easy to get a clear video of the game running on my SE30. So in the game, whose working title is Laser Pointer, you play a sort of sentient laser beam that can zip and zap between these circular nodes. Some of them zip you around automatically, like this. And as you explore the environment, you'll come across things like switches that open up certain pathways, or do things like opening a door. The overall idea is that it'll be mostly puzzles, with a bit of action thrown in there as you avoid obstacles, and as you progress through the game, there'll be an interesting narrative that unfolds around you. Here's an example of one of the obstacles, these sort of lightning generator things. And here's a little thing I've put together that just kind of zips you around in a fun way, because I thought it was fun. And then there's that custom development environment I mentioned. While I was thinking that I could program the entire game on a real or emulated classic Mac, the truth is that I'd much rather use a modern programming environment in modern Mac OS, especially since I'm also going to be programming for the Playdate as well. And so I've opted to use Retro68, an amazing open source toolchain that lets you compile classic Macintosh apps in a modern OS. In a way, there's a bit of cheating here since Retro68 uses GCC, and that means I'm taking advantage of all of the modern optimizations it uses when compiling code, far better than what was available with something like CodeWarrior back in the days of yore. That's probably saving me from having to write the critical parts of my game engine in assembly, but it also means I get to use my favorite code editor. My IDE of choice is Visual Studio Code, and I've written a number of tasks and scripts to make development more convenient. For one, I can easily build by just whacking a key on my keyboard, and I can whack another key to actually run the app. This will automatically launch Mini VMAC, and then start running the game. And as it's running, all of the output from the game gets printed on the terminal window on the right there, which is really great because normally getting at output from a classic Mac app is not the easiest thing in the world. So when the game's done running, Mini VMac automatically hides. It's almost like doing native app development. And if I run it again, note that Mini VMac didn't actually shut all the way down, it just hid in the background, so that means that it doesn't have to start up every single time I run the game. So for the Playdate side of things, I'll just mention briefly that I'm using CMake presets so that I can just switch over to compiling for the Playdate simulator. And if I run, presto, there it is. Same game running in the Playdate simulator. And note that the output from the Playdate simulator shows up over in the corner terminal window as well. So all of the output from the Playdate and Mini VMac is all going into one spot, which I find very convenient. There's one other thing, though, that it's doing behind the scenes when I build for Macintosh, which is that it's copying the latest build of the game to a special folder that's shared over FTP. So over here on my SE30, what that lets me do is hit a keystroke, and it will automatically copy the latest build of the game over my local network and then run it. This takes a few seconds, but there we go. And presto, the game is launched. And here's the game actually running at 30 frames per second on an SE30. And one of the other really great things is that over on my other computer monitor here, the actual output from the game is still printing to that terminal window. It's being sent over the network as well, so I can get output from my actual SE30. And one last thing, here's the game running on an actual Playdate. I can't say how much longer this game will take to complete, because naturally writing a game for a 68K Mac is a lot slower and has a lot more challenges than a modern game engine or even HyperCard. But the good news is that most of the engine work is done, and I'm starting to crank out features and content. With any luck, it might be done in time for Macintosh next year. And for those who want to do their own classic Mac development on modern Mac OS, I've created a GitHub repository containing a demo Visual Studio Code project with all of my supporting scripts for doing this development, along with instructions on how to set it up, run your app in Mini VMac, or automatically transfer it over the local network to your physical classic Mac. Link in the description. That just about wraps it up. I hope you're having fun with classic Macs this month, or, if you're not a wacko who still likes tinkering with vintage computers, you're doing something else you find fun and fulfilling. Bye for now.